Now it's time to get the options menu working. Okay, so probably going to start on the lighting first, since that's probably the easiest thing to do, and then work on the fog and anti-aliasing. Then we're going to be including an overall sound meter for all of our sounds in the game, and we can control that. We'll work on the difficulty settings and then resetting everything back to its defaults. Okay, so we'll start on the lighting then. So if you go to Window, Rendering and Lighting Settings, okay, which I've got docked. The easiest way to control the lighting is through the Environment Lighting. Okay, I'm going to be using this Intensity Multiplier. Since we can drag this slider, we can give it a different value for its lightness of the overall scene. Its default is 0.6, so that's what we're going to do for our slider. So on the options panel, just make sure you got it switched on again. We're going to go down to our lighting slider and yeah, click back on the inspector. So where it says min value and max value, make sure that the minimum value is 0.6, okay, to match that lighting. The maximum value, I might try going as high as sort of 3, okay, and you may need to experiment with this. 3 may be way too bright, I'm not sure, but just experiment once we get this working, and obviously you can just change that number accordingly. We don't want the whole numbers, we'll allow a float to work because the minimum value is 0.6 anyway. Okay, so we need to create a new script. So in the My Scripts folder, let's right click, create and C# script, and we will call this options controls. Okay, so double click this to open. So options controls. Okay, now we are going to be using the UI system, so we need to tell Unity that we're using that. So using Unity Engine .ui, okay, so that we have access to things like sliders and that kind of thing. And we do need to declare a slider, so we're gonna, this time I'm going to use public so that it's readable by everything. Okay, public, and it's of type slider. There it is, and I think I'll call this one light slider. You can call it anything you like. Okay, just so that we associate that with that. All right, so we don't need an update and we don't need a start in this. At least I don't think we do. So I'm just going to delete those. We do need a public function that we can call from the slider itself. So this one's going to be a public void that we'll call lighting, maybe, yeah, just like that. Okay, now the lighting itself is part of the render settings that Unity understands. So we call this by saying render settings. There it is, render settings. It turns green or greeny blue or whatever it is. To let you know that Unity understands what that is. And then we need to use this ambient intensity. Okay, that's basically that light, that slider that I've just shown you. And it should equal, and what did we call it? We called it light slider dot value. Okay, so whatever that value is of the slider, the ambient intensity will then match it. All right, so you can make your scene lighter or darker. So let's just save this, and we're going to apply this onto the options panel itself. So let's just drag this onto the options panel. We can see our script there, and it's asking for a light slider. So let's take our lighting slider and drag that on there. Okay, now we're going to click on the lighting slider itself, scroll down to where it says on value changed, and these are all the things you can do with it, by the way. I'm just going to click plus. I'm going to drag the options panel into there, and it's options controls, and we called it lighting. Okay, there we go. So that will now work. All right, so feel free to kind of test that out and check out those values. 3 may very well be too much, and you probably don't want to go any darker than 0.6, otherwise it's going to be way too dark. Okay, so that's good. That's the lighting one done. Now what about the fog? Okay, let's work on fog. Once again, it is render settings that controls the fog because it's part of your lighting. It's actually there, other settings, we just simply switch it on or off. But we also have some particle effects as well, don't we? I can't remember exactly where they are on here, but we did put in some particle effects for the fog. No, I'm not entirely sure where we did put them, but I know we did. So we also need to switch those off as well. Okay, so what we need to do there is declare a new game object, public of type game object called fog particles. Now this needs to be a different public void, a different function, so that we can call it from a different button. So public void fog, I'll just simply call it. Okay, and this one, first of all, we're going to switch off those fog particles. Fog particles dot game object dot set active to false. Now we do need what do you call it there? We do need hopefully this will work. We may need a boolean here. Okay, so in fact, maybe putting the fog particles there may not be such a good idea. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use an update. In fact, no, I'm not going to use an update. I'm going to use a new function that we'll call fog on. Okay. Okay, and we do need a boolean actually. I've just thought, because obviously this is a toggle. If we toggle it on or off, this is always going to be the same, so we're always going to be switching the fog off. So what I'm going to do here is declare, in fact it doesn't need to be public, it can be private. So I'll type bool and I'll call it fog active, and it equals true to begin with because fog is on. Okay, then we will say if fog active is equal to the value of true, then we will set this off. Okay, so Control C, and obviously we will then set fog active to false. And now we need an else if. Control C, else if fog active is equal, not sure why I've got my little hand coming up there. If fog active is equal to the value of false, then fog particles will come back on, so we will say true. And obviously set fog active back to true again. Okay, great. So now all we have to do, instead of putting this line here, we would just simply run this fog on. All right, and then obviously you can run those conditions and find out if that's the case. Yeah, I'm just taking a look at the line up there. Yep, that's fine. And now we have to do the same with the render settings fog. Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to copy this top line if fog active is equal to true. So just Control and C to copy. Just above the fog on, press Control and V to paste. Okay, so this time it is render settings dot fog, and then equals, we're switching it off, aren't we? So it's false. Okay. And then obviously curly bracket, and then once again to switch it back on we're going to say else if fog active is equal to the value of false. We're just going to reverse this line, so let's just copy this one, and obviously this is now going to be true, so we're switching it back on again and close the curly bracket. Now we don't have to change this boolean here because it's already being changed here, and obviously it's already going to run this function at that particular point anyway. So that will control everything for us. Okay, so yep, that's looking good. So let's just save that. Now on the fog toggle underneath the options panel, let's ensure we associate this. So on value changed, where it says Boolean, we're going to drag our options panel into there, and under the function we're going to go to options controls and run fog. Okay, that's going to allow us then to simply switch that on or off. Now if we go to our options panel, you'll also see that we've got our fog particles that says none, so let's find those. Oh, I can actually see those. So you know, under my assets, if you just open that, we've got our fog particles there. Okay, so let's go to fog toggle, to options panel, and let's drag our fog particles into there. Okay, that's great. So that will then switch those on or off.